All right, we're going to talk about how automation can improve cloud security. But first, we need to fundamentally talk about cloud a little bit. Unlike a data center where you actually have physical access to devices, you can connect to a console, you can go in and actually touch a machine. When you're in the cloud, everything is virtualized to you. So everything becomes an API, application programming interface. You are connecting to everything in the cloud via an API for the most part. There's certain things that have expanded importance as we move forward. One of those is around identity. Can you kind of summarize what you need to think about when you're in a cloud environment with automation, with identity, what access rights, how you control it, basically how you meet your principle of least privilege, which you have in most of your compliance burdens?
If I had to say what is the number one issue that I find consistently, well, not consistently, but the most common issue that I see with my customers, let's put it that way, it is a fundamental failure in properly controlling identity and access management, IAM. So identity obviously being who a particular user is, that being either a person or a service account bound to some particular process. I would say the number one thing that people fail to do is try to get people out of the process. What I find is that businesses often want to continue moving forward, and that is understandable. You need to have velocity, but at some point, you need to also dedicate time and make it a firm goal to move to a fully automated process where humans do not interact with the environment. I've seen so many cases where even in production, people actually have the capability to go in and physically edit resources in the console on the fly, which is it's not wise. You're opening yourself up to an enormous amount of risk. It is exactly how you are going to be destroyed. The easiest thing to break in a chain of security is a person. Now, of course, we can make mistakes and we can leave keys lying around. We can have insecure processes. That's all fine. But I guarantee you the number one thing that you're going to do if you're going to improve your posture is to get people out of the console. They should have read access. I completely agree, but they really should have no ability to manage or configure anything. Really, what people need to come to use is centrally managed identity and access management. And by that, what I mean is you need to use a repository, you need to use code, and you need to be declaring through this controlled centralized repository, through a CI/CD process, how IAM is distributed out. And you need to be distributing IAM out to particular service accounts. So you should be both generating identities like service accounts through that process, and you should also be distributing rights, in other words, permissions, roles, and access to those service accounts in a granular process. And you should be able to do that in such a way that most of these are also reusable. So each particular identity should have a specific task, a purpose, and a set of permissions around it. So that is the holy grail. That is what I see. That is what separates someone who truly knows what they're doing from somebody who is still struggling. And that is the difference between a really incredible and advanced security posture versus someone who is opening themselves up to enormous risk. It is literally as simple as that, is how well are you managing your IAM access and how few people are you going to have with access, preferably zero.
Thanks for that answer. And Gavin, so talking about everything in the cloud being an API, and so identity becomes a huge part of it. I know using a GRC tool to monitor identities and make sure you're meeting compliance burdens is a big portion of it. Can you kind of talk through what you're seeing as good practices, best practices, maybe what you shouldn't do, especially using a tool to monitor?
Yeah, I mean, with the API-centric nature of the cloud, a lot of people say that in cloud environments, since APIs are both the backbone and the Achilles heel of security, people need to take a lot of precautions for this. And a lot of our customers, from an identity and access management perspective, I think really what I heard John mention was the concept of making sure that there's less human interaction, and I think one of the big things there is customers gravitating to that machine-to-machine communication with regards to this. So we see a lot of conversations around compliance as code and making sure that we have machine-to-machine communication, and we see an uptick in conversations around things like OSCAL and OCSF and all of those type of machine-to-machine languages. But yeah, we see it all the time from a perspective of deployment for our GRC platform. And as it pertains to some of our use cases and how we're working with customers, that's where our integrations come into play to help shift things left a little bit, and looking at identity and access management, making sure that people are using and leveraging kind of the emphasis on access controls, for proper authentication and authorization mechanisms for the APIs. So that's a little bit of what we're seeing today with our customers.
So knowing identity is a huge part of cloud, there's still fundamentals that you have to follow. You still have to be sure you have strong network security controls, you have encryption in place, you have backups set up. All of those are capable of using automation because everything's an API. So John, back to you on this. As far as meeting all your security controls with automation, or even have automated checks out there to not only detect but remediate, can you walk through, at least in your point of view, some of the best practices you can do around that?
Cloud native tools are pretty excellent for managing your security posture. And by security posture, we're talking about the things that you're listing here, like backups, or maybe how your network is configured, maybe what you will and will not allow, using some sort of a centralized way of managing and controlling and monitoring your posture. I think that that's really best bet for at least your starting position. Like if you want to add additional tools on, sure, but I would absolutely leverage that at the minimum. Most of these also come with compliance packages, which allow you to try to achieve a certain posture for a particular compliance framework. I think that's also at a minimum a good goal to shoot for, basically. I think most companies probably have some sort of a mandate around what compliance level they're trying to achieve. But even if you don't, I think researching what is standard among industries and trying to achieve one of those compliance standards through an automated security command center or something similar, I think that's also just a standard best practice. And for people who aren't really sure about compliance, gosh, I mean, like, there's so much out there that you could leverage. I mean, even if you just went to, I know we were sort of going over AI in a different talk, but even if you went to something as simple as AI and asked it basic questions around what are some standard industry compliance frameworks that are best, I'm certain that you could get some answers. Even just some basic searches could get you there. Sort of a broad topic, but that's just sort of my go-to there.
Yeah, coming from the GRC background, I mean, automation is the bread and butter for any tooling. So, and I think I'd add a caveat to that, good automation is the bread and butter, because you can automate bad. And what our team does is making sure that when we're working with customers, that we're evaluating their business process, their current state and their desired future state, to understand what their practices are, how they're integrating with the different tools, how they're working with their environment, and then automating the good, and then improving upon, and then automating everything else. But there's definitely a delineation between, automating good and bad for sure. In terms of working within our tool and focusing on automation, there's a lot of different tooling that we see our customers really leveraging in terms of scanners and ITIL tools and hyperscalers, just to be able to get a full picture of their compliance and have an audit ready state. Also doing automated evidence collection and things like that. So in terms of automation, I mean, it's ever present in all of the different aspects of how they're looking to, ultimately show and display their compliance and ultimately, of course, their security, but using tools to kind of shift left in their software development process too, like Sneak and SonarQube and Burp Suite, and getting the data from that into our tooling is super important. Also, I think from an automation perspective too, there's kind of the front end process within our tool of documentation development, creating your security plans and all of that. But also the other piece of it, which is ripe for automation, is the continuous monitoring. And so setting up, from a perspective of your scanners and SIEMs and, hyperscalers and other tools, making sure that there's automation kind of at play in there from a continuous monitoring perspective, to ensure that you're continually in compliance with the frameworks that you're adhering to.
That's a great point. Compliance, even though you have an audit, that's a point in time. Most compliance frameworks require you to maintain compliance throughout the entire year. And so if you have automated compliance detection throughout the year using a GRC tool, that helps you meet those requirements. A few things I wanted to jump in on this, on the automation of these controls. Not only does the automation help ensure that your controls are in place, it can help you on recovery if you actually do have a DR incident and you need to spin it back up. If everything is in code, it's much easier to spin up in another environment versus having to manually create. It can help you in an audit. I've yet to have this happen, but my theory is that I can have evidence showing that every single thing we do in the cloud is through infrastructure as code. In theory, an auditor could look strictly at the infrastructure as code to audit your entire environment. So I've yet to have an auditor actually buy off on that, but the theory is there that if you can prove everything that's in your environment is in the code, you could at some point just audit the code and be sure it's there. Finally, there is this concept of drift detection that's out there, especially in cloud environments or anything that's automated. And drift detection will go out there and look at what your standard is, what you actually push out, and they can tell you if anything's actually changed over time, which can notify you if something actually goes off, if a manual change happens, if something unpredicted happens to your environment, it can notify you about that. So moving on to the next point here, tying a framework, any framework, FedRAMP, HITRUST, PCI, any of those into cloud infrastructure. A lot of those, actually all of those, were written for on-premise environments first, and then they moved into cloud environments. So the fact that everything becomes virtualized changes some of those controls. Tools like a GRC tool like RegScale can help interpret some of these requirements from these compliance frameworks that were initially meant for on-premise, but are now in the cloud. They can help identify and point users or customers to the proper way it would be done in a cloud. So if there's, let's say, a firewall requirement in an AWS, you have a network security control, so you can actually have a firewall, you could have a security group, you could have an ACL. There's multiple ways to meet this. Gavin, can you kind of run through how a tool like RegScale or any GRC tool would benefit a customer in the cloud environment because of this reason?
Yeah, I think it's super important for organizations, and you touched on it earlier too. Whatever your framework of choice or the flavor of the week or whatever you look at as your framework, there's when you're in ISO 27001 or you get the FedRAMP or CMMC or HITRUST PCI, it's super important to have, the first place, making sure that you understand your entire world of controls and having controls really be at that center of the universe. And that's what our tooling does and how we work with customers to reframe their environment to understand where the controls sit. And then also to your earlier kind of point, making sure that it can be applicable to your organization. And we have functionality and features to help with that, including RegML, which can help you write implementation statements, and also the extractor to pull in different policies that you have that apply to certain controls within FedRAMP or CMMC, for example. So I think it's super critical for organizations to adhere to that framework and then look at their environment through the lens of a platform like a GRC tool and a continuous controls monitoring tool to ensure that they understand where everything lives and kind of pulling in all of their evidence and all that information. So automation's key to that. And when we look at, FedRAMP, for example, a lot of the customers that we work with that are focusing on FedRAMP are hyper-focused on their, kind of early in the process and walking through and focusing on, documentation development, creating that security plan. And then, of course, kind of on the back end, making sure that we're also future-proofing for their continuous monitoring after ATO and all of that, using a tool and making sure there's automation at play becomes way more of an easy exercise. Like you mentioned with an audit, it's a point in time event, but you really want to be having it baked into your business processes and ensuring that this is something that you're doing at all times so that you're in an audit ready state, whether that be, for your FedRAMP or other certifications, and also, from a continuous monitoring and recertification perspective as well.
I want to speak to that for just a second because I vehemently agree with you. This is just a silly analogy, but I would say it's a little bit like housekeeping, as strange as that sounds. You really don't want to have a sink with every dish that you own piled high. I mean, like maybe some of us learned this in college the hard way, but like you don't want the trash can overflowing and like a whole sink full of dishes and all of your dirty laundry on the floor and all this stuff, and then you have to spend literally days trying to upkeep, and you're living in a horrible environment. You don't want to have that. You don't want to have that situation. What you would rather do is use a dish, have it washed, put it away, or maybe put it in the dishwasher, but you're continuously upkeeping your situation so that you're existing in a nice environment. And so the same thing could be said for using automation. If we had a magic robot, which we're getting there, so hopefully soon we're going to have one, but if we had a magic robot that could walk around the house and take care of our chores for us, gosh, wouldn't that be great? And it's the same sort of situation here in cloud environment. We actually do have these magic robots that could go around and they can keep track. They can document, they can update, they can automate, they can reverse state in case somebody comes in and fiddles with something that they weren't aware was not a good idea. Maybe they altered the posture of the environment and they negatively impacted it. This is removing toil through automation, which is something that I've mentioned a couple times, but it is the holy grail. It is the best possible situation. Get people out of the cloud, focus on automation, and let automation do all of these things that consume an enormous amount of time, and do it continuously. That was the key. That was what you said that I couldn't agree with more. Do it continuously, because I've seen many times with customers that they shoot to be completely compliant for a specific date. And then unfortunately what they do is they become slack. They allow their environment to run rampant. And then it is just like that college dorm, unfortunately, or college apartment. Things just go completely haywire. You've got massive amounts of non-compliance. You have basically dirty laundry everywhere. And now you have to clean it all up for the next event. And it's terrible. It's no way to take care of it. Continuously upkeep, continuously stay within the framework. I couldn't agree more.
Certainly wish I had something cleaning my place in college for sure. It was quite messy.
We all learned the lesson.
There you go. That's a very valid point. So the purpose of different compliance frameworks. So in FedRAMP, you have a system security plan that comes out, but you have to perform continuous monitoring or ConMon throughout the course of every day to show that you are meeting these requirements. If you do ISO 27001, you're supposed to have basically information security management system, ISMS, that's doing the same thing as you go through these. I've seen I've seen companies pass PCI audit, be breached the next month, and then be told they're out of PCI compliance because they're breached. And basically, it's always a point in time. You have to maintain it as you move through it. One of the key things with automation and using tools is you can go through and at least monitor and notify yourself. And not only can you notify yourself and correct issues, but that's evidence that you can provide to an auditor saying that, look, for the last 4 quarters, we've done this. For the last 4 quarters, we've done this. We can show quarterly access reviews. We can show that we've never used unsecure protocols. We can show that we harden our systems. You can go through and show all these using a tool that's out there, using automation. Doing this manually, and John brought up a good point, is I've seen so many companies basically do a death march to meet a date for an audit.
Yeah.
And they pump out policies, they pump out procedures, they basically make sure everything's in there. They get to the audit, they get through the audit, everybody wipes sweat off their brow, and then they promptly go back to what they were doing before. And that is not meeting the compliance framework. Some of them, SOC 2, maybe you won't get caught until you go through your next check and they actually validate for the last year that you've met all those controls. But when you're doing ConMon and FedRAMP, that actually will pop up pretty quick. So that's not really a sustainable way to meet compliance. You really need to find a way that's hopefully automated to reduce the toil and to ensure that's happening all the time.
One last thing, because you said it, and I want to repeat it because this is something that I only learned in the last, let's just say 4 years, because I haven't been previous to that, I hadn't been that into compliance. But something that I learned, and you just mentioned there, and I want to restate to make this very clear is even if you try to meet a certain point in time becoming compliant, like even if, let's just say you're running the company and you say by December we're going to be compliant, I don't care what it takes to get there. I want to repeat this because this is so critical. You have to demonstrate through evidence, through logging and through evidence that you have been compliant over a time period, meaning you're going to have to show in arrears that you have been doing the right thing, which means it is a bit like getting a background check, if you want to put it that way. And when they do a background check on the compliance of your company, they're going to see that you were non-compliant over a long period. You may be compliant now, and they're going to say, well, that's fine. You know, let's maybe refer to it a credit score instead. Maybe you have a good credit score now, but in the past, you've failed to pay repeatedly. So your score is not very good with us right now. You're going to have to demonstrate competence over time before we begin trusting you. And so being able to document that automatically and to be able to provide that evidence over time, absolutely critical, because you can't just show up having a history of non-compliance and just say, we're all good now, because they're not going to buy it. They're not going to trust you. They're not going to give you what you want.
Yeah, and we have all the tools now that, you know, and the automation is so advanced and everything on the cusp of AI, like there's no excuse anymore too, right? It all is out there, and yeah, there's no more excuses for sure.
Gavin, good segue into my next topic. So we'll start with you on AI. So what benefits is AI providing, especially in GRC or compliance? Can you kind of run through what you're seeing, what it can help with now, and then where you think it's probably going to go in the future?
No, that's you know, a hot topic for sure. And to some extent, AI has become a little bit buzzy, right? And, you know, everybody's coming out with a new AI feature, functionality, or tool or product. So it's hard to cut through some of the noise. And I think, you know, one of the things that we've tried to do as an organization is ensuring that, you know, it's a companion tool to making your, you know, day job easier and better, and more accurate. I think that's super important to kind of at least first start focusing on, is that, you know, AI can really be an amazing companion tool. I think in a previous talk with you, John and Greg, there was conversations around, you know, the assistant nature of AI and how it can assist you to do X, Y, and Z. So we've really focused on that as like the primary focal point of making sure that, you know, AI and the tooling that we have available to us with the latest and greatest technology with AI is actually, you know, being an ancillary benefit to your business process and to what you're doing, and ultimately saving you time, money, et cetera. And is that companion tool to you to help you go through and look first before you have an audit, run through my security plan, show me where my grades are. You know, audits are timely and costly and everything else. So if I have a real good cheat sheet that goes through this from an AI perspective, I can tangibly see, you know, got a pretty bad grade on this control implementation. Here's a recommendation to how we can actually make that better. So, you know, that's really where we're going from an AI perspective. And then, you know, when it comes to what we're seeing for our customers and kind of the appetite for that, I think the market's ready for it from a GRC perspective, right? There's a big conversation around like shadow AI in organizations today, where people are going, they're using AI, whether your organization knows about it or not. It's happening. Just like shadow IT, now we have a huge challenge with shadow AI. So people are using it, people are really adopting it. So it's time for GRC organizations to catch up. And, you know, that's what we're doing at RegScale. And that's what we also see our customers doing from a readiness of use perspective, but also in their organizations and how they're leveraging AI in their product offerings and in their daily work. So it's exciting times. A little bit of you know, again, there's a lot of noise to cut through right now. You know, and as it relates to compliance, there's, you know, new frameworks coming out regarding helping with this as a challenge, and certifications happening with you know, ISO and other things. So yeah, exciting times all around related to AI, but certainly, you know, as a companion tool to the people that our tool helps, that's how we've kind of gone to market with it.
That's a valid point. ISO's come out with 42001, which is basically a management system for certifying your AI. and you can actually use a GRC tool to manage that as well. So right now we talked about AI can benefit us by helping to start with that blank sheet and filling out at least some of the information so we can work towards it. It can do validations, what's in place. I think in the future, it can do a full validation of, let's say, a system security plan or anything you're going to submit ahead of time, where it can call out any errors that it sees or concerns. There's many other areas I can see AI where it actually, if we ever get to the point where we can actually give it permission to make changes to make sure we stay compliant. I don't know if we want to do it, but John, in your opinion, in the future, how can this is more of a just thought exercise. Where do you see AI helping us around this compliance and everything?
I have to keep reiterating just generally my opinion of AI when it comes to any of this, which is it is the best way to remove toil for people. And by toil, what I mean is generally speaking, if there's a task that's going to take you a long time because it just takes time to write, let's just say paragraphs in a document, if there is a tool that can speed run a number of those paragraphs and at least get them roughed in, then that is by far going to be the best use of this tool. I made the analogy previously, but I'd make it again. It is the difference between a hand saw and a power saw. You still have to have someone who knows what to cut and how to cut and what kind of cuts they want to make. But the point is you don't have a guy having to sit out there for 2 hours making cuts on boards. You can have the boards cut in 10 minutes. That doesn't mean that you need to be replacing everyone's job. It just means that you're enabling more work to be performed faster. And so it's enabling people more than anything. So I would suggest leverage AI. Don't be fearful of AI. Definitely leverage AI and understand its pros and its cons. Just like saying, gosh, should we use power tools? You absolutely should. You absolutely should. But you also need to be mindful. You need to have training in how to not hurt yourself with them or how to operate them dangerously. And so, I think Gavin said something previously. It's been bouncing around my head because I've been thinking about it because it's so true. Shadow IT, shadow AI. From my perspective, shadow IT, this is my opinion, but I think shadow IT is a symptom. It's not an issue. I think it's a symptom. And a symptom of shadow IT means that you have friction. And by friction, what I mean is you've created processes in your company that are maybe so difficult to maneuver or so difficult because of their nature and security that you have created so much friction for people that they have pressure. They're trying to meet deadlines. They're trying to be agile. And they're trying to meet the needs of the company and the demands of their bosses and and of their coworkers. So they're trying to be productive. And they have this friction on them, and they're cutting corners, and they're not doing it out of spite. Most of the time, they're doing it out of pressure because they're trying to produce work and they're trying to build things, but they find themselves in a position where it takes a week to get permissions applied to something. So shadow IT rears its head, and they start cutting corners or they start finding workarounds because they need to get something done and they can't be waiting for it. Shadow AI, I think personally, is the same thing. You're asking people to use, I'm going to go back to the analogy, you're asking people to use hand saws, and they're looking over at power tools and they're going, I can have this shed built in a day, and you're asking me to take a month to do it because I'm not allowed to type something into AI. It's sort of like, I don't know if you've ever heard of a desire path or a wish path. I think we've all seen them. It's basically like you can see concrete poured out, and of course you're meant to walk along these concrete paths, but frequently on college campuses, again, I'll go back to that analogy, you'll see these paths through grass that make a more direct route through something. And I mean, that's human nature. You're like, I'm not going to go make this long 90-degree walk and take twice as long to do something when I can just walk right across there and be where I need to be. The point is that's sort of the same thing yet again. It's a symptom. It just means that you planned it out poorly and people are taking the natural route. Good security and good automation should enable people. What we're aiming for is as frictionless as possible. And so I think personally, the way to achieve that is through guardrails, meaning allow people the freedom to operate within an environment. You don't have to lock down the freedom of their movement. What you need to create are boundaries around what they are and are not permitted to do. So if you can secure your environment in such a way that people are allowed to attempt things, then a developer or a user will be able to attempt various solutions to a problem, and they'll simply bounce off of the solutions that they're not allowed to use, but at least they're able to try multiple things. So they may try 5 different solutions as something, they may recognize they're not allowed to use 3 of them, but 2 of them they are, and they suddenly go, okay, that's fine. I mean, at least I was able to try some things. I didn't have to make 5 requests and wait 5 weeks. So anyway, shadow IT, shadow AI, that's a brilliant statement. I totally agree with that.
I do want to bring up something I've always said about security. So most of the time when you're in IT, you're working with engineers. Engineers like to solve problems. Security engineer, developers, there's a problem, they solve it. If you make security a problem, they're going to find a way to bypass it. That's basically where shadow IT comes in place. If your policies and procedures are the problem, they're going to find a way to bypass it. I might disagree slightly on AI. I think AI is so new that there's not many particular restrictions on it in some places, other than some places may mandate and say just don't use AI at all because we don't understand it, but some places probably don't have any policy around AI right now.
Agreed.
So shadow AI in that point is it's a new technology that companies have not adapted to yet, that their employees are actively trying to take advantage of. Real quick, I wanted to cover one thing that you brought up, Gavin. So you brought up OSCAL. Can you just briefly, for everybody, describe what OSCAL is?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think mostly on the back of FedRAMP, OSCAL was born, which is the Open Security Controls Assessment Language. And so when we talk about automation and time to value and speed and having these things be, to use John's words, frictionless, really the birth of OSCAL was from NIST to ensure that there's a more frictionless way to communicate machine to machine for a lot of these compliance challenges and compliance topics. You know, as we look at FedRAMP and our FedRAMP customers, a lot of customers are very interested in ensuring that there's OSCAL native outputs within our tool that they can leverage so that they can take full advantage of that. We're seeing more conversations happening about it. We're seeing a lot of discussion around it. There was some adoption slowness that was happening, you know, as a rollout of it, but it's still a very hot topic. And you know, our tool is OSCAL native and built on OSCAL, so we've been able to stay ahead of the game on a lot of those conversations. But it's the real genesis of it is to ensure that, you know, that machine to machine communication can happen as frictionless as possible.
And that's a good point. So once again, it's Open Security Controls Assessment Language. I don't have that memorized, but Dr. Iorga, she actually helped create this. This is basically a way for your control catalogs. So if you have multiple different control catalogs, let's say you're doing ISO, you're doing FedRAMP, you're doing HITRUST, all of them have different types of controls, and a lot of time the controls are not really interchangeable between systems. So if I'm tracking a control for FedRAMP some way, and it might be the same control I use for PCI, and I'm using different systems, there's not really a machine-to-machine way to express these controls. And so OSCAL comes out and provides you with a machine-readable representation of your controls. It gives you a format you can put your controls in so you can share it between, which is a big thing. And with automation, like Gavin just mentioned, you can use it to provide your GRC tool with the way to share controls. And you can actually go and talk to, let's say your auditor or the JAB, which is now FedRAMP board and FedRAMP. You could, in theory, send controls to them in that format. And if they have a way to read it, they would then be able to read it. So the fact that RegScale uses it natively as part of how they're setting up is, I think, in my opinion, future looking. It's actually making sure that as time goes forward, there's actually this format that we're using that is accepted by NIST, which is one of the biggest organizations around standards that's out there. Just to end this up, Gavin, on OSCAL, are you seeing a lot of adoption in it right now? Is it growing rapidly? From what I've seen, it's picking up, but not at a rapid pace yet.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are interested in it, as we talked about from a future proofing perspective. We're seeing a lot of organizations be very sensitive about OSCAL and consider that when they're procuring a tool like ours to ensure that, you know, they're set up for the future when it's fully adopted, that they'll be able to take full advantage of it. So a lot of organizations see it as the future for a handful of different use cases as well. So it really lends itself to a handful of scenarios where you know, the communication can happen and the formatting is more seamless. So it's picking up, I guess, yeah, to put it that way, to use your words. I think picking up is a good way to say it, but it's certainly front and center for a lot of our customers and a lot of organizations that we talk to.
We're talking about automation of controls in the cloud, and now we're talking about how to automate your controls that you actually record. So there's lots of different ways around it.